By law, bourbon must be made in the US. It's literally America's native spirit. That's right. You can make whiskey anywhere, but if it's not made in the US, it ain't bourbon. And Kentucky, oh, that's the king of bourbon, producing 95% of the world's supply. But what actually goes into making this smooth, caramel-kissed, oak-aged masterpiece? Let's take a journey through the fascinating process of crafting real bourbon, straight from the distilleries that do it best. The bourbon starts its life not as a smooth golden liquid, but as a thick, soupy blend called mash. Think of it like making oatmeal, but instead of eating it for breakfast, we turn it into something way more exciting. By law, bourbon must be made from at least 51% corn. The rest is a mix of grains like rye, barley, and wheat, each adding its own unique twist to the final flavor. Corn makes it sweet, rye adds a spicy kick, wheat softens it up, and barley helps with fermentation. Once the grains are carefully measured, they're mixed with hot water in massive stainless steel cooking tanks. This isn't just random boiling. This heat starts breaking down the starches inside the grain, converting them into fermentable sugars. That's right, the grains are basically getting prepped to be turned into alcohol. Why is 51% corn the magic number? Well, go below that, you don't have bourbon, you have whiskey. This specific balance is what gives bourbon its signature smoothness. Now, things start getting wild. The cooked mash is moved into huge fermentation tanks, sometimes made of stainless steel, sometimes old-fashioned wooden vats that have been used for generations. This is where yeast enters the chat. Yeast is like the tiny, invisible worker that does all the heavy lifting. Without it, we wouldn't have alcohol. When yeast meets sugar, it kicks off a process called fermentation. Imagine a crazy science experiment. Yeast eats the sugar from the mash and burps out alcohol and carbon dioxide. If you've ever seen beer being brewed, this step looks similar. Bubbles rising, foam forming, and the liquid starting to look alive. Fermentation takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days, depending on the distillery's technique. This result is a cloudy, slightly fizzy liquid called distiller's beer, which sits at about 9 to 10% alcohol. If you took a sip, it would taste, weird, like a mix between warm corn soup and an unfinished beer. Not quite the bourbon experience we're after. But how do we turn this funky beer-like mixture into something refined and sippable? That's where distillation comes in. If that seems interesting to you, then don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Alright, now it's time to heat things up, literally. The fermented mash is pumped into a column still, a towering metal structure that looks like something straight out of a mad scientist's lab. Distillation works like this. Alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water, so by carefully applying heat, we can separate the alcohol from the rest of the liquid. Inside the column still, the mash is heated, and as it warms up, the alcohol starts turning into vapor. This vapor rises through the still, leaving behind the leftover grains and water. The higher it goes, the purer it becomes. Eventually, it reaches the top, where it's cooled back down into a liquid, and voila! We now have raw, unaged bourbon, known in the industry as White Dog. Ever wonder what bourbon looks like before it ages? It's completely clear. That deep amber color doesn't come from the distillation process at all. It comes from the barrels. At this stage, the White Dog is extremely strong, often between 120 and 160 proof. which is 60 to 80% alcohol. Tasting it now would be an experience. Let's just say it burns, but in a way that already hints at the rich caramel flavors waiting to develop. But how does this clear liquid transform into the smooth golden bourbon we recognize? It's all about the barrels. This is the real game changer. Bourbon's flavor and color doesn't come from the mash, the yeast, or the distillation. It all happens inside the barrel. Bourbon must be aged in a brand new charred oak barrel. No reusing, no shortcuts. But why char the inside of the barrel? Well, it's like roasting a marshmallow over an open flame. As it caramelizes, it develops deep, sweet, toasty flavors. The same thing happens inside of a bourbon barrel. Distilleries take American white oak barrels and blast the insides with fire, creating a blackened alligator skin texture. This isn't just for show, as you might think. It creates deep grooves in the wood, allowing the liquid to interact with its rich natural flavors. As the white dog sits in the barrel, something amazing happens. The charred wood filters out the harsh components, making the bourbon smoother. The caramelized sugars in the oak seep into the liquid, adding notes of vanilla, toffee, and spice. Over time, the whiskey moves in and out of the wood, absorbing deep, complex flavors. Ever noticed how older bourbons tend to have a richer, more intense flavor? That's because the longer they sit in the barrel, the more they absorb. And here's something cool. Every bourbon barrel is unique. Even barrels from the same batch, stored in the same warehouse, can end up tasting completely different. Some become extra smoky, others develop strong vanilla notes. That's why master distillers taste and test each batch before bottling. But aging takes years. How do they know when it's ready? What happens if it stays in the barrel too long? That's coming up next. Bourbon doesn't just sit in the barrel, it lives in it. The aging process is where the real magic happens, transforming the clear, fiery white dog into the rich amber liquid we all recognize. But it's not just about waiting. It's about what's happening inside those barrels every single day. When the weather gets hot, the whiskey expands, soaking deep into the wood. When it cools down, the liquid contracts, pulling those caramelized sugars and vanilla flavors back into the bourbon. This process repeats season after season, year after year. Have you ever noticed how bourbon from Kentucky tastes extra rich? That's because Kentucky has wild temperature swings, hot summers, cold winters, forcing the whiskey in and out of the barrel more often, speeding up the flavor extraction. But here's the twist. Not all barrels age the same way. The barrels at the top of the rick house, where it's hotter, age faster and develop stronger, bolder flavors. The ones on the lower levels take their time, absorbing more subtle, mellow notes. Not all barrels age equally, and that's where the master blenders step in. Some bourbons are single barrel, meaning they come from just one barrel, rare, unique, and often pricey. Others are blended from multiple barrels, creating a balanced, complex flavor. Before bottling, most bourbons go through proofing, diluting the alcohol with pure water to bring it down to a drinkable level. Most are bottled at 80 to 100 proof, though some special releases keep it at barrel proof, meaning no water is added. It's just pure, intense bourbon straight from the barrel. And guess what? Every sip you take is the result of years, sometimes decades of careful aging, blending, and perfecting. But wait, what about the color? That deep amber glow? That's 100% natural. Unlike other spirits, bourbon cannot have added colors or flavors. It all comes from the barrel. After years of aging, blending, and proofing, it's finally time to bottle the bourbon. This step is a mix of modern efficiency and old-school tradition. The barrels are emptied, and the bourbon runs through fine filters to remove any leftover charred wood pieces. But don't worry, nothing artificial is added. The flavors stay exactly as nature and time intended. Now the liquid is ready to be bottled. If you've ever seen a bourbon bottle, you know they come in all shapes and sizes. Some tall and elegant, some short and sturdy, some wrapped in wax for that extra fancy touch. At the bottling line, machines fill, seal, and label each bottle with precision. But at some distilleries, this process is still done by hand for special high-end releases. And just like that, after years of waiting, bourbon is finally ready to be enjoyed. So, the next time you pour yourself a glass of bourbon, take a second to appreciate the journey it took to get there. From simple corn and water to a barrel-aged masterpiece, every bottle carries years of history, craftsmanship, and patience. And now that you know all the secrets behind how it's made, are you tempted to try a new bourbon? And if you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes look at bourbon, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into your favorite foods and drinks. Here's to smooth sips and great stories. Cheers.